All righty. So Your Mind at Work, Under the Hood, session 5. So my partner in crime, Jane, and I, this month, February, today I'm talking about drama and uncertainty. And then Jane will be going a little bit further with a more pragmatic approach to how we deal with that in terms of responding and reacting at work next Wednesday, February the 22nd at 8:30 a.m. I will share with you the name of the book on which my part of this Your Mind at Work has been based, but you have to wait till June until I do the big reveal. So today we're going to be talking about drama and uncertainty. So we're moving away a little bit from the prefrontal cortex, the good old logical thinking part of the brain, and we're moving somewhat towards the subconscious, but a very particular part of the subconscious brain. Today, we'll be looking at walking towards, running away, labeling and reappraisal, symbolic labeling, a summary of drama, uncertainty and control, reappraisal in more detail, oh, it's just my brain, and an uncertainty summary, and all in the context of understanding ourselves as individuals and how these topics might apply to those that we either manage or we work with, our colleagues at work, or maybe even outside of work. So walk towards, run away. Right, who can tell me what nationality this individual is?
No idea.
Maybe British by the
British.
hat.
And the tea.
And the tea, yep.
Yes, he's drinking tea, he's got a bowler hat, he's got a briefcase, he's got a three-piece suit, very smart. You are absolutely correct. He is British. Here's the one thing that people sometimes say about us Brits. Have you heard the expression, stiff upper lip? Anybody heard that before?
Yes, definitely.
Definitely.
Who can give me a definition of stiff upper lip?
Probably, I feel like it's
Like
posh.
serious.
Serious, maybe.
Doesn't show their emotions.
There's the key. Doesn't show their emotions. And us
Poker face.
have a terrible reputation for this. So this stiff upper lip is this attitude that somehow us Brits are brought up from, almost the day we're born with this attitude of you can't show anyone your emotions. Like, don't let them see that you're upset. Don't let them see that you're angry. Bottle it all in, stiff upper lip, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's true to some extent, but I show you this picture because this is the theme now that we're going to explore over the next 2 or 3 sessions. In other words, it's all about your emotions. So we will decide at the end of today whether the British have got this right or if they've got it wrong in terms of stiff upper lip. And what we're talking about today, and I apologize to Kelly, even though she's not on the call, because she hates it when I get technical, but I did want to show you that what we're talking about today is the limbic system. So we're not at the prefrontal cortex anymore. We're not quite at the subconscious cerebellum, but there's this whole part of the brain in the middle. And a couple of the parts of this limbic system that I will draw your attention to is the amygdala, and I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, and the hippocampus. So the limbic system is the part of the brain that tracks your emotional relationship to thoughts, objects, people, and events. Think about that right off the bat. Us Brits, are we using our limbic system or not? We will see. It determines how you feel about the world from moment to moment. And the key word there is feel. How do I feel about life, the universe, this call, Tech Connects, Jane, Next Dimension? You have an emotion attached with every thought. And it's the limbic system that generates your ability to feel those emotions. The limbic system drives your behavior, often quite unconsciously. And the limbic system scans data streaming into the brain, telling you what to pay attention to and in what way. In other words, whether to get upset or whether not to get upset. For example, ladies and gentlemen, this is serious stuff. So everything you do in life And you can't avoid this. This is part of our natural evolution, even since we were walking, the plains of the Serengeti 250,000 years ago. Everything we do in life is based on our brain's determination to minimize danger and maximize reward. And that's all generated through the limbic system and your emotions. So towards responses, maximizing rewards, curiosity, happiness, contentment. What about those emotions that would be away responses? Anxiety, sadness, fear. So towards responses are good, away responses are not so good. Primary rewards for towards responses would be eating food, naughty food maybe like chocolate, earning money, handling money, sex, even a familiar smiling face. These can all generate emotions that point towards responses. On the other side of the scale, we've got primary threats. So seeing a bear in the woods, getting hot, hungry or thirsty, or even seeing angry faces in a photograph can generate an away response, which can generate a negative emotion. The way that the human brain has evolved is that the towards responses or the primary rewards are about survival, and you generate away responses from primary threats that you perceive or your brain perceives to be life-threatening, and through the emotions that it generates. So the two parts of the limbic system that we're going to pay particular attention to today is the hippocampus, that memory that can be consciously experienced. Think about that for a second. Memory that can be consciously experienced. So it's a feeling that comes from the subconscious. I've seen that before. I felt that before. And then the amygdala, which is the brain's thermometer for feelings. So if you're hot under the collar, if you're stressed, if you're angry, or even if you're happy, which is also an emotion, the extent to which you're happy or angry will be determined and measured by the amygdala. So as you experience emotions, your limbic system automatically becomes aroused. And if the limbic system becomes aroused, that means the prefrontal cortex cannot be getting the energy of the brain. It's a trade-off. So as we talked about arousal last month, the more you use one part of the brain, the less you're able to use another part of the brain. So as the limbic system becomes more aroused, the more you're taking away from the prefrontal cortex. Your hippocampus not only remembers facts, but feelings about facts. And this is really interesting because to me, this is what resonates when people say, you'll never remember the exact words that somebody said to you, but you'll always remember how they made you feel. And that's because of your hippocampus. The hippocampus remembers whether something is a threat or a reward, as we've just seen. And the amygdala becomes aroused in proportion to the strength of an emotional response. So the more you feel angry, the more you feel happy, the more the amygdala becomes aroused. This is really serious stuff. This can affect all of us at work, outside of work, all the relationships that we try and generate in business and outside. So when the limbic system gets overly aroused, as I mentioned before, it reduces the resources available for prefrontal cortex functions, which means the link between the limbic system arousal and the prefrontal function kicks in at low levels. As soon as you start feeling emotions, you're taking away from your conscious mind. When the limbic system arousal is increased, it's increasingly more difficult to be mindful. And we talked about that way back in October, but it's all part of the ability to be aware and focus and the use of the prefrontal cortex. As the limbic system arousal increases further, we become more likely to respond negatively to situations. And this lends itself completely to Jane's session next week, when she talks about the difference between reacting and responding. When we're hot under the collar, we're more likely to react, and reacting can't always necessarily be seen as a good thing. And your colleagues might behave in that way too. So the hypothesis for today is being able to regulate our emotions well is no longer a nice skill to have. It's actually essential for success, not just in work, but in life in general. So how do we regulate our emotions well? And how do we achieve this state of equanimity? By the way, does anybody have a quick definition for me of what equanimity is? Anybody know? Equanimity is mental calmness, composure, and evenness of temper, especially in a difficult situation. What it really is, if you achieve, which very few people ever will, 100% equanimity, you are able to control your emotions to stay absolutely calm and not react adversely or create arousal in your amygdala, despite anything that's thrown at you. Anything at all. There's no scenario, no situation at all that can get you flustered or create this emotional response. You stay absolutely calm. That does not mean all the Brits walking around with their stiff upper lips have achieved equanimity. Far from it, actually. But it is a state that if you can achieve it, it's absolutely amazing. Now, some people would argue, well, Pete, can't you just do that through meditation? Maybe. That's one of the ways that you could do it. Could you do it through mindfulness? Maybe, because you would be in touch with how you're feeling consciously. But it is, I think it's just true to say that in the modern workplace and even outside of the workplace, if we are able to regulate our emotions, think of all the unhelpful, unhappy scenarios that we might avoid. Conflict in the workplace being one of them. So once emotions kick in, there are actually only three things that you can do. There's three options. First option, number one, is to express your emotions. In other words, if you're feeling angry, let the whole world know that you're angry. This may be a good thing or a bad thing. I'm going to say today, I don't think necessarily expressing your emotions is always a good thing. Option number two is expressive suppression. Yes, the good old stiff upper lip from the Brits, holding the feeling down so it's not obvious to others. You know, it's an interesting thing because we've talked in previous sessions about the ability to inhibit responses. So deliberately not doing something to enable your prefrontal cortex to work more effectively. Those who've been on the previous sessions might remember that. But now I'm actually going to say to you today that holding feelings down is not actually a very good way of dealing with those emotions. So I'm going to give that a cross as opposed to a check mark as well. So if we can't do option one and we can't do option two, then the only thing left to us is option three, which is cognitive change. Cognitive change, you can do one of two things. Labeling, which is when you take a situation and put a label on your emotions. Now, this can be as simple as, I am feeling really sad right now. I am feeling really elated right now. It's scientifically proven, and you kind of have to follow me a little bit blind faith here, that it's scientifically proven that if you can label something in that way, it will help you to regulate the emotion, good or bad. And then the other thing that's left to us is what's called reappraisal, when you change your interpretation of the event altogether, which in some cases you might say, I have to put myself in the other person's shoes. And we'll come on to that a little bit later as well. Symbolic labeling, and I'll just talk a little bit now about the work of Melody Wilding. You can look her up afterwards. She's actually produced an emotional literacy toolkit. In other words, a toolkit to help you to label your emotions, which is one of the ways of regulating them. So it can help you control stress. It can help you feel less anxious. And she's actually got a whole vocabulary of words that we can actually look at in a second that help you to do this labeling. But it's also important to know that simply saying, I feel, helps bring a reaction under control. Remember, reaction is not so good. Response is more considered and more appropriate, especially in the workplace. So acknowledging your feelings rather than dismissing them is crucial to lowering emotional reactivity and improving your overall mental well-being. So this lady's done some amazing work on this, and as we always do, we'll give out the slides afterwards, and you can read them through in more detail, because I don't want to take too much time on this section. So let's say you come home at the end of a long work day with low emotional literacy. You might describe your mood as bad or down, but this ambiguity could leave you feeling helpless. You could stew in an unpleasant emotion. These are all Melody's words, by the way. Unsure of what to do to make it better, but not getting in touch with your needs. Miscommunication could follow, leading to an evening of arguing with your spouse. Bit melodramatic, but let's continue. So let's take a look at the same scenario, but with emotional labeling. By naming the emotion, you're able to recognize that you're feeling worried about the status of a major project. I said to my wife last night, gosh, Flo, I'm so worried about TechConnex tomorrow. I don't feel I'm as prepared as I normally am. So instead of taking it out on your spouse, you're able to ask for time alone to decompress and process through the concerns on your mind. Rather than being fused with emotion, seeing it as part of you, you are able to gain distance and perspective to see the situation more clearly. In my case, it took about 2 minutes. What am I worried about? They're all good people at TechConnex. They'll understand. And here are a few of the words that good old Melody is actually suggesting that we should be using to label our emotions. And she's got strong, medium, and weak. I'm only showing you the strong words here. But happiness, just taking one example, can be labeled as delighted, ebullient, ecstatic, elated, energetic, enthusiastic, euphoric, excited, exhilarated, overjoyed, thrilled, trickled pink, which is one of my favorites, turned on, vibrant, or zippy. And there's probably a few English expressions that I could throw in there as well that maybe some of you wouldn't know. But anyway, that's the point. You are able to label your emotions because you have this huge vocabulary at your disposal called emotional literacy. So here's the point. When you try to find the right word to identify an emotional sensation, you are symbolically labeling. And it's a seesaw balance, because if you describe an emotion in 1 or 2 words only, it helps to reduce the emotion, and you will achieve the balance in terms of the energy that you're able to give your prefrontal cortex against the limbic system. So the bright orange part of the brain is in this diagram or this slide is the prefrontal cortex. The limbic system is the middle piece at the other end of the seesaw. But if you open up a dialogue about an emotion, you tend to increase it. So it's okay to say, I feel really anxious, but if you talk about it too much, it can make the emotion worse. That is actually a really controversial point if you think about it, because all of those medical professionals who want you to talk about your feelings, potentially, if you agree with that, are actually helping you to make you feel worse. So it's a little bit controversial, and just bear with me as we go through the rest of the presentation. So in terms of drama, the brain doesn't like it. It causes the limbic system to kick in ways that sometimes might be overwhelming and difficult for us to control. But the point is that the brain is an overarching organizing principle to minimize danger, so to move an away response and maximize reward, which is a forward response. We have to be aware that our emotions can be easily aroused and stimulated. And once an emotion kicks in, trying to suppress it either won't work or it will make things worse. So the old Brits with their stiff upper lip, not the best approach. Labeling emotion helps to reduce it. Labeling needs to be symbolic, but not a long dialogue for it to reduce arousal. Suppressing an emotion makes other people feel uncomfortable. Apologize for the typo. And practice noticing emotions as they arise is the way to start being able to respond as opposed to react. Okay, let's talk about uncertainty and control. So the brain doesn't like drama. That's one of the points that we're making today. But the brain actually dislikes uncertainty and lack of control even more than drama. So we're working with our emotions, we're battling with our emotions because our brain doesn't like these things. Our limbic system does not like these things. So where there's certainty and where there's control, is a happy brain. Where there's not certainty and where there's not control, the brain will start to think about those emotional responses, which are away responses or negative responses. So the brain is constantly receiving information, data, feelings, thoughts from different parts of the brain, and it stores these as memories so that it can always say to itself, or you can say to yourselves, what have I seen before? Have I seen this before? Because what the brain does when it's confronted with a new situation, it tries to predict the outcome. Why does it try and predict the outcome? Because it doesn't like uncertainty and it wants to feel in control. So what is happening now? Quick reference of the brain. Have we seen this before? Oh, yes, I have. I can predict what's going to happen. So, but when you're faced with a new scenario that you can't predict what's going to happen, the brain is uneasy. So the brain as a predictive machine craves certainty, and it likes to recognize patterns in the world, and it's certainty that generates a towards response. So when a craving is met and when there's certainty, there's this sensation of reward. I get it every morning because I do Sudokus. It could be a crossword puzzle. It could be something else. But when a craving is met and you generate a reward, there's a sensation of a positive response. But when the brain can't predict the outcome of a situation, an overall away response occurs. Uncertainty to the brain feels like a threat to your life. Even ambiguity can light up the amygdala. You remember the thermometer of our emotions? And people really underestimate this because simple exchanges in the workplace can generate a feeling of uncertainty. And that's when we can have emotional responses that lead to conflict or one party not feeling too good about things. So think about it like this. The brain senses a lack of control, therefore it's lost influence. If it's lost influence, it can't predict. If it can't predict, there's even less certainty. So it's this sense of autonomy or control. If you feel in control, it generates a reward or a toward response. If you feel not in control, it generates a threat or an away response. Now think about all the people that you work with. What sort of things might be happening in their day-to-day lives that would generate uncertainty and lack of control, and therefore stimulate the limbic system, which will generate emotions that they will either try and suppress, stiff upper lip, or they will show, and sometimes in showing those emotions, create conflict in the workplace. It's not easy remembering all these things, but just put yourself in your direct report's shoes, or put yourself in your boss's shoes, or even think about yourself. Do you feel uncertain when there's uncertainty? Do you feel a threat and anxiety every time you're not in control of a situation? How do you cope with it? When you have a sense, though, that you have a choice, something that felt stressful becomes more manageable. And today I'm going to use the example of kids to show how this can work. But I can tell you that it will work equally as well with your direct reports and anybody that you meet in life who is an adult. We've all been through it. It's time for bed, but I don't want to go to bed, says the child or the children. So what we do, we give them a choice. If you go to bed now, I'll read a book with you or I'll tell you a story. Which would you prefer? Why don't you tell me a story? Okay, let's go. Now, of course, it's not always that simple, and I'm not going to pretend it always is. But once you give the child the choice, you've actually put them in a little bit of control. And that's really what the fight's all about. I want you to go to bed, but I don't want to go to bed. That's not my choice. Well, if you do go to bed, I'll give you a choice. You can read a book or we'll tell you a story. Oh, wow. I quite fancy a story, actually. The gift of choice. Now, if you do that in the workplace as well, so you don't actually tell people what to do, but you actually give them a choice and steer them in, it's A or B maybe, or it's 1, 2, 3. Think about mentoring for a second. If we've got direct reports, there'll be occasions when as leaders, if you like, we have to mentor. But mentorship is not about just giving the answer. Mentorship is about, here's a scenario. based on my experience and knowledge and the way that I look at life, I think there are three possibilities here. If we do option one, this is likely to happen. If we do option two, this is likely to happen. If we do option three, this is probably likely to happen. Which do you think we should do? Says the mentor to the mentee. And then the mentee processes the information, regains a little bit of control, and says, maybe it's B, maybe it's option two. And the gift of choice has taken anxiety over a decision. And usually when a mentee comes to a mentor, there's a decision to be made that they're struggling with. So think about it like that, even though this was a very simplistic example. So once emotions kick in, we have this labeling, and then we have what we call reappraisal. And reappraisal involves reframing and recontextualizing. So let's talk about that. You've got this balance going on in the brain all the time, the fight for energy between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. So the logic against the emotion. Conscious control over the limbic system, your emotions, is possible, but not by suppressing, rather by changing the interpretation that creates the feeling in the first place. And there are four main types of reappraisal: reinterpreting, normalizing, reordering, and empathy, which is what I alluded to earlier, when you're able to put yourself in another person's shoes and try and look at the scenario from their perspective. So number one, reinterpretation. You decide that a threatening event is no longer a threat. Simple as that. Well, that takes quite a strength of character if you think about it. Just being able to say to yourself, I'm not anxious about the fact that I'm presenting at TechConnect tomorrow and I don't feel very well prepared. It's not a threat. I'll be fine. I'll wing it. I'm okay. Takes a strength of character or a very confident person to maybe do that, but it is one of the tools in the toolbox of reappraisal. Normalizing is describing the emotions and stages that occur at each stage during change, such as denial or anger, to help people reduce the threat response. Now think about change management. Every time we launch an initiative in the workplace and we're trying to get people to change and they fight and resist us. Why do they fight and resist us? Because they're angry. They don't want to change, but they're afraid. It's different. It's new. I don't want to do it differently. I'm comfortable. I'm in control doing it this way. Please don't ask me to change. But if you're able to actually take people through the different stages of an emotion, in other words, here is the change that we would like to make. But when we break it down, there are 4 stages to the change. And this is what's in it for you at the end of the change. You're actually taking the emotion or the emotional response, you're diluting it when taking the thermometer down, the amygdala, because you're able to put it in such a way that it's normal. It's okay. It's no longer a threat. Okay, it's a change, but I can see there's a logic why we're doing this. I can understand there's something in it for me at the end of it. Maybe I shouldn't be so afraid. Number 3, reordering. So changing the importance of information relative to other ideas. So it's like values in a hierarchy. Being able to actually say to yourself, okay, this generated a threat, but actually there's a positive that will come out of this. And then finally, empathy. When you take another person's perspective, you are changing the context through which you view a situation. This is called repositioning. But finding a new position from which to look at an event will help you to control your emotions. And I'm pretty sure that when Jane talks about this next week, here is one of the better ways of avoiding a reaction and creating a response. Because if you're able to stop and pause, recognize that you're having an emotional response, label it, recontextualize it by putting yourself in the other person's shoes and trying to understand their perspective, you've just taken the time and the trouble to empathize and reposition or reappraise. Therefore, your own emotions should not be as strong. Even if you still don't agree with the other person maybe that you're talking to, the emotional response will be diluted, the temperature in the amygdala will come down. So is the theory of how your brain works. And the other way of reappraising is just to be very dismissive and say, ooh, it's just my brain. So in other words, if you're feeling frustrated in the context of everything that we've talked about in terms of the potential responses, the way to look at it is just to be dismissive and say, you know what, it's just my brain. You're recognizing the fact that the brain is reacting in an emotional way. It's an away response. It's a threat. It's not about survival. It's life-threatening. It's anxiety. It's stress, or it's a combination thereof. But if you're able to take a step back and go, oh, you know what, it's just my brain. It's not being flippant, but it is a very powerful way of, combating an emotion that potentially might get out of hand. So back to my example, I feel really anxious. I'm at TechConnects tomorrow. I don't feel I'm really well prepared. It's just my brain. I'll be fine. I understand what's going on. It's the old amygdala again. So, certainty is a primary threat or a reward for the brain. Autonomy, or the feeling of control, is another primary reward or a threat for the brain when you feel you don't have it. Strong emotions generated by certainty and autonomy may need more than labeling to manage, although labeling's an option. Reappraisal is a powerful strategy for managing increased arousal of the amygdala, the old temperature in the thermometer. So try and watch out for uncertainty creating a feeling of threat. Can you actually train your mind? And can you actually understand when other people are perceiving uncertainty and therefore feeling a sense of threat? Because it's going to affect their emotions and the way that they behave and the way that they react. Watch for a sense of reduced autonomy creating a feeling of threat when you feel out of control or you're not controlling a particular scenario. And find ways to create choice and a perception of autonomy wherever you can. The example of the child going to bed. So that is drama and uncertainty. I hopefully I've left enough time for a discussion around it. Before I do so, just to remind you that Jane again is speaking to us on Wednesday next week at 8:30 about how we take some of those theoretical concepts, and I apologize if it was a little bit theoretical today, and how we then apply them to responding and reacting at work. And that's next Wednesday at 8:30.